Thank you. I'm pleased to be leading this conversation as part of Z3 2020, Visions of a Shared Future. Today, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, who's been here for more than 7 years, and I will talk for just under an hour about all the things he's been involved in. Ron, it's nice to see you.
Great to see you too, Ethan.
So, you've really had an extremely eventful term here, and I know that you've been very personally, intimately involved in an enormous number of important changes. The Abraham Accords, which I want to talk about, come to mind, but I think that I want to start, if you don't mind, with asking you, there's been this sort of paradoxical quality, at least as I observe it, which is on the one hand, the United States and Israel has become closer than ever in the Trump administration and during your time here. On the other hand, not beginning with Trump, but continuing with Trump, the U.S.'s role in the region of the Middle East has declined. And so on the one hand, you can hold them as tight as you want. On the other hand, your role, Israel's role in the region, has grown, and the Americans' role in the region has declined. What do you think?
I think that's a very smart observation. I think part of the reason why you had the possibility of something like there was a perception. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second there. I didn't hear, I lost the sound. I don't know if you heard it, Marcus.
So I think it's a very astute observation, and I can hear you fine. It's a very astute observation because I think Israel's emergence as a regional power has been accelerated by a perception among our Arab neighbors that the U.S.'s role in the region, engagement with the region, is being reduced. At the very least, that the military footprint of the United States in the region is being reduced. And that is actually something that connects President Obama and President Trump and now President-elect Biden. It actually connects all three of them together because no one has been arguing we need to send more troops to the Middle East. And therefore, Israel's role in the strategic calculations of countries in the region, it could be the Emirates or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or others, Israel's role has become more important. And the need to work with Israel in terms of dealing with common challenges becomes more important. And I think that's part of the reason why we were able to achieve the breakthrough we did. I think there's a couple of other reasons. One of them is certainly the danger of Iran that I think unites Israel and our Sunni Arab neighbors. I think there is a concern there not only from Iran's fanaticism and radical revolutionary policies. Iran's a Shia power, but you also have Sunni radical movements that also concern those states. And that's Al-Qaeda's 1.0 and ISIS's 2.0. And they know that a 3.0 is going to happen. And so you have two challenges, both on the Shia and Sunni side of extremism, and they need an ally to confront those challenges together with that ally. Now, if you have the perception that the U.S. is leaving the region, then you sort of have a situation where you got this Iranian tiger and you got this ISIS or whatever comes next leopard. And then you have an 800-pound American gorilla that's leaving the building. And so they look around and they see, well, there's this 250-pound gorilla wearing a kippah on. Maybe we should work with them more closely. And I think that helped bring us to the moment that we saw emerge in the last several months. Another factor is the rise of Israel as a technological power in the world. And that's relatively new.
Right?
I'm sorry?
As a power broadly. I mean, in other words, Israel is simply a much more powerful state than it was 10 or 30 years ago. And
correct.
I think
there's no question about it.
Yeah. It's a sort of contemporary version of the Iron Wall. Right? It's power. It's strong Israel. I mean, Iron Wall was a very defensive view.
That's an interesting insight. But, Iron Wall, the old Jabotinsky theory that says Israel must be extremely strong, that the Arab states will try to attack Israel until they realize that they've gone up against an iron wall. They can't do it. And so then they move towards a reconciliation. I think here it's much more than a wall because it's also about what Israel can do for them to enhance their own security, enhance their own prosperity. I mean, it's important.
That's what I mean by it's a modern contemporary version. Yes, exactly. And the other slight paradox, which to me is interesting, is that Israel had developed a security doctrine of the periphery, basing basically Israel, Iran, and Turkey against the Arabs. And now we have the inverse of this, which is Israel and the Arabs against Turkey and Iran.
Well, in the case of Iran, that's true because of the common dangers it poses. And many of those Arab states, you're quite right, see Turkey under Erdogan. I don't know if it's Turkey so much as Erdogan as an individual, but they see his connections with the Muslim Brotherhood as something that endangers them as well. And that would be true for Egypt. It would be true for the Emirates, true for the Saudis and others. So you're right. It's definitely different than it was 40 or 50 years ago. But this new story, part of the reason why it happened is that the U.S. is receding from the scene. So I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. And also, it has affected Israel's rise as a power, has also affected our relationship with the United States. And I think a lot of this, you may recall, you probably don't, but I'll tell you, in 2014, when I was the first Independence Day that I was a sitting Israeli ambassador, I said at that event, this is 2014, I said that I believe Israel will be the most important ally of the United States in the 21st century. And I remember Susan Rice was the national security advisor at the time. She was at that Independence Day event. And I explained why. I said because of security and technology, because you do not have a better security ally, I said, than Israel. And if you think about security in terms of a military that can defend itself by itself, so you don't have to risk your sons and daughters to defend another country. If you think about a formidable intelligence capability, and here Israel is the finest intelligence service in the world, a cyber capability, and Israel is renowned for its cyber capabilities. And certainly, if you think about the great cyber powers that are emerging, it's just on the United States side of the equation. You can put Russia and China on the other side, but certainly on the American side, you really have Great Britain and Israel as being those two allies who the U.S. can partner with on a global level in terms of cyber.
Sure.
And then you have weapons making capabilities, offensive and defensive capabilities. You know, the United States is using now the Iron Dome system that we jointly developed with the United States, the anti-missile defense system. We have a trophy system, which helps tanks to avoid incoming missiles from tanks. And that was also developed from Israel. So you have Israel as a remarkable security partner and then a technological partner. And I think here, you know, people have heard this story for the last 20 years, 15 years, Israel being the startup nation, this emerging technology power, but it's more than just a feel-good story. It actually affects relations that Israel has with other states. And the technologies that we're talking about.
It's why the UAE and Bahrain got involved with you partly, right?
It's certainly part of the reason why, because if you think about the traditional Arab boycott of Israel, it's a little bit like Oregon, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and half of Southern California boycotting Silicon Valley, because we are the second great center of innovation in the world. And to the extent that you have leaders in the Arab world who want to catapult their countries forward, Israel becomes a very good ally to do that with.
Sure.
And I think that's part of the reason why they wanted to sort of make this jump, because Israel's technological prowess is not on the descent, it's still ascending, because you're moving into a world of innovation. And if you think about technologies, not just the technologies that people know Israel's good at, agriculture or water, but cyber, autonomous vehicles, where Israel's got 400 car companies. We don't make a single chassis of a car, but we have 400 or so car startups in Israel just dealing with the technology under the hood. And of course, I think the big thing is artificial intelligence, where Israel, again, you have United States, Russia, China, and Israel. Artificial intelligence is one of those areas that's going to become more and more important. So all of those things together, that's the reason why in 2014, I said Israel was going to be the most important ally in the 21st century. Now, that's a very big statement to make from a guy who has the privilege of representing a country the size of New Jersey with all of 9 million citizens. But if you stop and you think about those two things, security and technology, which is the best American partner looking ahead 50 years, you see that it's not so crazy anymore. When I said it in 2014, a lot of eyebrows went up. Now people say, okay, now I hear the argument. I think in 10 years from now, people are going to say, well, of course that's the case. And I think this truth, Ethan, was kind of buried under policy disagreements with the Obama administration. It was buried under policy agreements with the Trump administration. And a lot of times people lose sight of these tectonic plates that are pushing the two countries together. So
I
I'm
think
very
that's true.
bullish on the U.S.-Israel relationship because I think U.S. and American interests are actually moving closer together, not further apart. And if the United States, the last thing I'll say, if the U.S. is going to withdraw from the region, certainly militarily, then the importance of having a solid, reliable, democratic ally in the heart of this region grows. And therefore, I'm very confident about the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship because it is on this trajectory, and Israel's bringing a lot more to the table than it did 20, 40, 60, certainly 72 years ago.
There's no question about that. And this has been especially evident in these last few years. But now I want to ask you to imagine what might go wrong. What could be the problems? In the new relationships with the Sunni sheikdoms, and also I want to get to the Palestinian question because while it is not an existential problem, there is a human rights issue there, and the United States, in terms of its relationship, and again, especially if a Democratic administration is coming in, it can make something of a difference. So let's go one at a time. Let's first start with UAE and Bahrain. I understand there's an incredible warmth that you feel from the officials of both these countries. One sees it. It's really very heartening. And there is an enormous amount that you and these countries can do together, and it's fantastic. What do you worry about?
Well, first, let's understand really what the opportunity is and why this is different than things that have happened.
I don't want to waste too much time. I agree with you. There's an enormous
don't worry. You'll get your bad news. We'll always get to the bad news. But let me tell you, the good news is
I agree with you. It's enormous.
But you have to understand, I think the viewers have to understand the difference now between what you had in the case of Egypt or what you had with Jordan. So as your viewers know, you're talking about the third peace agreement with the Emirates. And then, of course, we had a fourth with Bahrain. We waited. The first one was in 1979 with Egypt. The second one with Jordan in 1994. And we waited 26 years till 2020 to get the third and 29 days to go from the third to the fourth with Bahrain. And then we had another normalization agreement, which we are in the process of finalizing now with Sudan. Now, the difference, I think, is very instructive because when Sadat made his decision, he faced enormous opposition. I mean, he was alone in the Arab world in making that decision. Egypt was thrown out of the Arab League. And this peace that Sadat made was rejected by Arab governments throughout the region, and to the extent that we can monitor public opinion, because it's not the same as monitoring it and just asking a poll in a democratic society, but there is public opinion in these states throughout the region, and it was rejected by those states as well. And today, if you fast forward 40 years from 1979, when the Crown Prince, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, made this decision, it was welcomed by several important governments in the region. A few were quiet, which, as you know, being a long observer of the Middle East, the silence can speak volumes in the region.
Of course.
And to the extent that we can measure public opinion, there was a great resonance of this peace with people throughout the region. Now, there are many reasons why that may be. It might be because we don't have a border dispute with the Emirates and Bahrain. We haven't fought wars with the Emirates and Bahrain. But I think it's also the nature
of the things we said before, which is the rise of Iran, the rise of Israel. I mean, there's a whole series of things that have changed in these 40 years. But absolutely correct.
You don't see political, military, economic,
people are not objecting in the
cultural forces militating against this in the way that you do with Egypt or you do necessarily with Jordan. Because until quite recently, if an Egyptian businessman would make a deal with a Tel Aviv businessman, he might come back and his home could be burnt down. And so you have support at the top with President Sisi, but you have forces within Egypt that militate against it. If a Jordanian intellectual As you know, when you
Yes.
were there in Israel, if they would come and
Hmm.
sit down and meet with Israeli counterparts, go back and publish this nice piece in a Jordanian paper, that may be the last time they published anything. I don't see
They
any
lose
of
their
that in
job.
the Emirates. And
No.
given that the Emirates are a financial and commercial center in the Arab world, if I could think of one country where you would have the most bang for your buck, or buck for your bang, I should say, by making peace with them in the Arab world, I would say it's the Emirates. So I think that's very good. But where you asked me, well, what problems
What do you
um,
worry about
could
as you move
emerge?
forward?
Well, what I would worry about, if first and foremost, is a change in policy in Iran. That will impact the normalization. Now, those who
So
have
what do you mean,
surfaced this,
change in policy by this country
right?
toward Iran? Or
Let me understand. What was the recipe for success? Why did this happen now? This has been going on. There has been an opportunity here for several years. I would say going back
right,
to about 2014 or 2015. It couldn't have happened 15 years ago or 20 years ago, because the Arab states did not make a decision that it is in their interest
right.
to actually merge into an alliance with Israel. That is something that really came to the fore in the last decade and has accelerated 2014, 15, 16, and that gave the window of opportunity that ultimately the diplomats we were able to sort of push through there. What created that opportunity? So I mentioned some of the factors: the rise of Iran, the rise of Sunni
Sunni
fanaticism,
extremism.
the
Yes.
danger that the perception that the U.S. was withdrawing, and Israel's a technological power. Now, I don't see
Well, also
Israel's.
The Arab Spring, right, which showed
The Arab
people across
Spring
the Arab world,
made them more concerned about stability
and
than
also
they
to
were
understand
before.
that their problems were not as a result of the Palestinian situation.
No, they understood that a long time, Ethan. That
Some
maybe
did,
some
some
people
didn't.
who live in foreign ministries and some editorial boards that actually believe the nonsense that the source of all the problems in the Middle East was the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And a lot of people
It was
say
a pretty
now the Arabs
widespread myth.
understand. Yeah, but it was a myth that caused tremendous damage, because it was a
I
myth
hear
that
you.
actually guided policymakers for decades, and it was basically based on nonsense. There
Well,
are problems in the Middle East, and you have a battle between the forces, I would say, of modernity and medievalism. And they
right.
see that. I just think it no longer became a tenable position to say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is somehow, by solving it, it will be elixir to all the problems in the region. Now, we should try to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to solve that conflict. But to think that that's going to change fundamentally what you have in the chaos in Libya, or what's going on in Syria or Iraq or Yemen or anywhere else throughout the region, was always absurd. But you see, the
Yes.
Arab states use this. The reason why we didn't have the opportunity for a breakthrough earlier is because the Arab states have been poisoning their populations for decades to believe that Israel is this tremendous force for evil, and that they sold to a lot of Western diplomats, you have to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before we can do anything. And that was a way for many regimes to divert from the fact that they were keeping their people in a very backward situation for
Yeah, but
centuries, and
it was
and
also
it would help
something
them
they
divert.
felt and
But when you
believed.
see these new threats, Ethan, when you see them, they realized in the last 5-6 years, we could already see it from those leaders. We want to move forward with Israel. The
Right.
problem that they had is the baggage of the decades of poison of their populations, and even though they're
And
not
the sense of the
democracies,
veto.
how do they maneuver? The veto, by the way, was given also by the West, by
Of course.
by the European foreign ministries, by United States,
Correct.
both Republican and
Correct.
Democratic administrations. They basically were working under the principle that unless the Palestinians agree, they were never going to have any progress with the Arab world. I cannot tell you how many officials on both sides of the aisle said to me, or I was there in meetings with the prime minister, and say, if you make peace with the Palestinians, you'll get 21 Arab states, 22 Arab states to
Right.
make peace with Israel. And we'd say, well, that's great. But what if the Palestinians don't want to make peace? What do we do? Do we give them a veto power over this process? And that has been there really for 40 years until 2020.
Yes.
40. I
Yes.
would include also the peace with Jordan. That in a sense reinforced the veto, because that peace happened a year after Oslo. So people said, hey,
Hmm.
look, You had to have this breakthrough with the Palestinians to have the peace with Egypt. Sadat actually showed that they didn't have a veto power. And from Sadat to MBZ, you had 40 years of really this nonsensical policy being put front and center. So the recipe for success is confront Iran. I would say embrace your allies in the region. And the third thing, and I'll get to that in a second, and the third thing is leave the door open for the Palestinians. Leave a door open for them if they want to actually engage with us to reach peace. But don't put that front and center, and don't give them the veto power. Now, what about embrace your allies?
Just stop you for 1 second there. I want to ask you, because I do think that the Trump administration deserves the credit for whatever reason for deciding that it was not going to put the Palestinian issue front and center, something that seemed unimaginable in the foreign ministries across the world and in this country until the Trump administration took over. I know you and the prime minister have been arguing against that for a long time, but it seems to me that they're coming in and saying, we actually don't consider this a terribly important problem. The other stuff's more important, that they created a breakthrough that wouldn't have happened without them. Do you think I'm right?
I wouldn't put it that way, that they said that this is not important. They were focused, actually, the Trump administration from the beginning, on trying to get an Israeli-Palestinian deal. What they didn't do is they didn't hold up everything and simply chase after the Palestinians to cater their every whim. They also put forward a peace deal, which is the only realistic deal.
Wasn't their central effort to work on the outside, to work with the Saudis and the Emiratis effectively to pressure the Palestinians from the outside, rather than work with the Palestinians to get them to tell everyone outside, okay, we're ready?
No, they didn't choose not to work with the Palestinians. The Palestinians chose not to work with them.
Well, given what they offered the Palestinians, that was the choice they made.
No, the Palestinians cut off ties with the Trump administration when they made the decision to recognize Jerusalem as their capital.
So much below what was appropriate to the Palestinians.
No, it was actually, I'm just saying historically what happened. It's important to know the facts about what happened, and then people can come up with their theories around the facts. I'm telling you that the Trump administration from the beginning, particularly the president, was laser focused on trying to get an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. Okay? I didn't believe that it was possible. From the very beginning, I did not think it's possible to get an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal today. Because I did not see any evidence whatsoever, and I've been over 7 years ambassador here. Before that, I was 4 years in the prime minister's office. I've seen every piece of intelligence that has to deal with the Palestinians and their position. I saw no evidence that they were willing to cross a Rubicon and actually make peace with Israel. I saw no evidence of it. And you had a lot of diplomacy that was trying to push something that had no chance of happening. And I believe that at the beginning of the Trump administration as well. But I must tell you, they made an effort to engage with them. They made an effort to see if there was a way to somehow get a breakthrough. And I was skeptical of doing this. But what happened was, with the Palestinians, they stopped when Trump made the decision, President Trump made the decision in December to recognize Jerusalem as the capital. They just stopped engaging. The peace plan did not come out until over 2 years later. And they just were not in any way, engaging with them. And what I wanted to tell you,
I feel like, Ron, the way you describe the situation is not really appropriate. I mean, to say that the Americans were desperate for a deal with the Palestinians,
I didn't say they were desperate for a deal. I never said that.
Focused on it. Yeah, they were laser focused on getting it. Yeah. If you're laser focused on it, you don't give away the embassy question for nothing. You want to get something in exchange from the Israelis.
No, okay. So I don't want to, Ethan. I don't want to relitigate the whole thing.
I don't want to relitigate it either.
But the United States did not move the embassy to Jerusalem for 45 years before Oslo. It had nothing to do with it. It was always another excuse why the U.S. will not move the embassy. We're the only country in the world where America doesn't put their embassy. The question that you have to argue
about whether it was appropriate.
Because when it happened, everybody said the same thing. It will set back the cause of peace, and it did not. It's true we don't have peace with the Palestinians.
Depends what you mean by setting back the cause of peace. Well, it led the Palestinians to walk away. Why do you not say that sets back
The
the cause of
Palestinians have not engaged in good faith negotiations, Ethan, for 10 years. They didn't engage for 7 years before
peace?
Trump's Jerusalem decision. If we want to go back and repeat the same mistakes over time and bang our head against the wall and hope we're going to get a different outcome, then fine. I'm telling you, having
So,
been there, it did not achieve peace with the Palestinians, but it did not set the cause of peace back at all. The message that it
well, the
sent
cause with the
was
peace
that
of Palestinians, not with the
it did.
broader
We have
region.
two pieces. Do you think, Ethan? Do you think that peace between Israel and Egypt is important?
Yes.
We did not have a peace agreement with the Palestinians before and 40 years after. Do you think the peace with Jordan is important? We don't have peace with the Palestinians. I think it's important to have seized this opportunity to have peace with the Emirates and Bahrain, and it would not have happened on its own. They took away the Palestinian veto. That is a conscious decision. But how do you
Yeah.
show that they don't have a veto? How do you show that they don't have a veto, Ethan? You
You go to
recognize
the
Jerusalem as
outside.
the capital.
But
You recognize Jerusalem as the capital. Because if you don't move unless the Palestinians will say, okay, we would have never actually had this peace. It taught the Arab states, it convinced them, hey, the United States was moving ahead. They left open a door for the Palestinians. And in fact, if you look at what President Trump said in the recognition in December 2017, he said the final boundaries in Jerusalem will be decided. He actually said that. But instead, the Palestinians, instead of seizing on that and say, hey, he didn't say that there wouldn't be something in Jerusalem for us in the future, they abandon talks and walk away. What I want to explain to you of what am I concerned about. Here's the formula that works. The formula that works is confront Iran, embrace your allies. I consider the Jerusalem decision to be embrace of Israel. And I think there are different things that Trump did vis-a-vis the Emirates and the other Gulf countries where he embraced them as allies. And the third element is don't put the Palestinian issue front and center. Leave a door open for the Palestinians. If you have a leadership there that wants to walk through that door to achieve a peaceful settlement with Israel, fine. But don't chase after them. That was the winning formula of success. What will prevent us from being
let me go to the
successful in the
Palestinian
future?
issue. I want to talk about the Palestinian issue because I understand. I've been talking to you for a dozen years about this. That this was a bad focus from your perspective. I get it, and I think that what's happened with the UAE and Bahrain is a strong case that you make. But the question I have for you about the Palestinian issue is not is it an existential threat to Israel? Of course it is not. But is it not a threat to Israeli society, to Israeli democracy, to Israeli morality, to be ruling over people who do not have full rights? And even if they do not chase after you, what do you do about it? It is not a harm-free situation for Israel. I don't mean in terms of security. I mean in terms of all those other things. What's your view?
I don't accept any of your premise that you have in
You
your
don't think
question.
it's bad for the country to rule over
Israel
people?
has tried from the. I think the
I don't say it
moral
hasn't
obligation.
tried. I'm asking, is
The
it
more
causing harm?
listen, the moral obligation of a government is to protect the lives of their people.
Okay.
That is the single most important thing. We
Fine.
have in the Palestinians, we have half their politics dominated by a force that calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. We have a second half run by the Palestinian Authority that has poisoned an entire generation of Palestinians to hate Israel, to hate Jews, and has shown no willingness whatsoever to reach a historic compromise and to show that, hey, the Jewish people have a right to be in this land as well. So I don't suffer from the moral compunctions that you're talking about.
Well,
I
let me
don't suffer
interrupt you
from
for
that at
1
all. And
second
I
there.
think most Israelis don't, because
I
most
don't
Israelis
understand.
know that
In
we're trying to make peace
1993,
offered to them,
wait,
and they're unwilling
wait.
to do it.
Okay, but you're saying that. But wait a minute. In 1993, in the Oslo Accord, the PLO wrote that it recognizes Israel's right to live in security and peace. And it also said that anything that it has said in its charter until then that violated those principles were no longer valid. Isn't that some recognition of that?
No.
Do you think they're
I don't want to
lying?
relitigate. Ethan, it's like we're going to relitigate 25 years of Oslo.
Well, but you said they've never done anything.
That's why 5 years later, they had to go and do some sort of show that they showed in the Palestinian parliament. I have seen no evidence that they have actually been willing to turn and tell their people that you need to live in peace with Israel. I haven't seen it in their
No
school
evidence
system.
or not
I
enough
haven't seen it
evidence?
in their media. I haven't seen it in their media. And if you want to understand where the Palestinians are and you want to focus on what the chances of them moving towards peace, don't focus on what this or that diplomat in Europe or the United States is saying. Just turn on a television set, look what the Palestinians are watching, look what they're reading, and then you understand whether or not you have a force
Okay,
there that is willing to make
I
a compromise. Now, I
understand.
do feel that there are Palestinians who would like to reach a rapprochement with Israel, who would like to reach a compromise with Israel, but they are not the ascendant force today. And I haven't seen
But
any evidence that the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority is prepared to confront the rejectionists. Why is the issue with the breakthrough with the Arab states so important? Because part of the argument of the rejectionists on the Palestinian side, part of their argument was, we have the
nobody will
entire
do it.
Arab world lined up behind
Of
us.
course,
And
of course.
my hope would be that if Israel is able to, now we have peace agreements, hopefully with 5 Arab states. Hopefully we can move that to 10 or to 12, or we won't necessarily get all of them because there are Arab states under the thumb of Iran, like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and maybe a few of them that are, they have issues of the Muslim Brotherhood, which could be Libya and a couple of more. But if you get the majority of Arab states, our hope would be that those forces within Palestinian society that would like to seek an accommodation with Israel, that they would be emboldened, that there would be a backing for them to do what they're doing. And the rejectionists who say, wait, the entire Arab world is behind us, those other forces could say, what are you talking about? The Arab world is moving ahead with Israel, and that they could see the benefit that peace could bring them. And what you
But
need
Ron, I
is a
want to ask you.
Palestinian
I keep
leader.
asking you.
What
Do
you need is
you
a
really
Palestinian
not
leader,
think?
Ethan.
But do you
What you
really
need, let me
not
just
think that the?
what you need is a Palestinian leader who is more interested in the lives of the Palestinians than the Palestinian cause. And that, arguably, the only leader you've had for the last century who falls into that category, in my view, is Fayyad, is the former prime minister, who is really focused on improving the lives for Palestinians. Because if the Palestinians make peace with Israel, that whole cause issue evaporates.
I
And
understand.
instead, they're wedded to a cause. They put forward positions that have no chance of any sane Israeli government agreeing to. And it makes it impossible for move ahead. And the ones who finally understood it before the diplomats of Britain or the diplomats of France or the diplomats even in the United States were the Arabs. The
I
Arab states
understand what you're
understood. They
saying.
said they're never
I
going to make. I can't tell you how many people have told me personally, Ethan, personally, Arabs, Arab leaders who'll say they will never make peace with you. They
I
tell us that.
understand. But what I want to understand is, why do you not consider it a challenge internally for Israel to be having to rule over these people without giving them full rights? Why doesn't it not bother
Now,
you?
we're having a conversation about rule now. The Palestinians
About what?
apparently elected
Rule.
about ruling over them. Okay, about
Okay.
98% of Palestinians live under the control of the Palestinian Authority, and they apparently vote for the Palestinian leadership, or at this point, once every 15 years or 20 years, if they ever get around to actually having a real election. So I know here are the alternatives that Israel faces. What is the alternative to what we have now, to continuing to manage the situation the best that we can, to leave an open door for any Palestinian leadership that wants to make peace with Israel, but then to just move forward, to continue to build our country, to build it up militarily, technologically, and diplomatically, to work with
But
the
you're
other partners in
also,
the region who want
I
to make
mean, what
peace.
about
We
this? I
cannot
don't know,
make
but
peace by ourselves, and we
I
can't just
understand.
simply say,
But
okay,
there's
you
an
know what?
aspect. There's an
It's in
aspect to what's
Israel.
going
You
on.
had the argument of those who did the disengagement, which I opposed at the time. The argument of them was, you know what? Unilaterally, we should walk out. This is better for Israel for all the reasons that you mentioned before. And it's proven to be a strategic disaster. You take an area like Gaza, and now Gaza is you're not dealing with the possibility of 2, 3, 4 missiles. Now we're dealing with the possibility of thousands. So if the alternative is for Israel to take action that could endanger the very security and survival of Israel, then Israelis are not going to do that. And I
I
think to keep
understand.
pushing and pushing, and to not, you cannot have a Palestinian leadership that is basically, and the prime minister has said this many times, that they're pampered by the international community. They never have to put forward a real good faith compromise to peace. And everyone kind of dismisses it. And so they'll talk about Clinton at Camp David, and all of a sudden, what was Arafat's counteroffer? Then they'll mention Olmert, that Olmert made a proposal to the Palestinians in 2008, never a counteroffer. All of the efforts that I've been involved in the last 11, 12 years, intimately involved in every detail, I've never seen any good faith effort by the Palestinian leaders to try to reach an accommodation, because they don't want to reach an accommodation. They do not want a state that will live at peace with Israel. They want to have a state that's going to attack Israel. And it's very clear to anyone with eyes in their head that that's the case, and that's what most Israelis understand.
Yes, but why doesn't the continued establishment, the growth of settlements, cause a problem in this as well? Why do you not consider that an irritant to the possibility of a future coexistence?
Because I just don't. I think that it's been a big red herring for the last 20, 30 years. It's not the reason why we don't have peace. You had the Trump administration that put forward
the reason, but it's certainly a reason.
It's not. You've had a conflict. Look, you've had a conflict for 50 years before 1967. It is the refusal of the Palestinian national movement to recognize a nation state for the Jewish people in any boundary. That's what our conflict is. I'm going to tell you a story that will explain to you how much this is not understood. A short one. We spent a lot of time on the Palestinians. By the way, this is why we never got to peace with anyone, because we're focusing on an issue that they are not prepared to solve right now, instead of actually dealing with all the opportunities to exist. So this interview is kind of a microcosm of what's happened for the last 25 years in terms of peace speaking. Let's talk about the Palestinians over and over and over again and get nowhere. But I want to tell you this true story that will actually explain a lot of the problem. Before I was chosen to be ambassador, I hadn't yet taken up my post. I had been nominated already, and I think the government maybe had even voted on it. And it was in late August 2013 or early September 2013. And John Kerry, who was then Secretary of State, had started this peace process, and he was trying to get the parties together and hopefully to work to see if they could get a deal. And one of the key people on his team asked to meet with me in Jerusalem, end of 2013. And the purpose of the meeting was this person wanted to talk to me about the upcoming speeches at the UN General Assembly, which was going to be 3 or 4 weeks later that September. And this person was very concerned that those speeches would lead to a rupture between Israel and the Palestinians, because if you've covered those speeches over the years, sometimes both sides would stake out their positions, and it wouldn't bring the parties together. It would actually bring us further apart. And so his idea, trying to launch this peace process, get it off the ground, was to make sure that these speeches would not derail his efforts. So he comes to see me, and here's what he says to me. He says, "I would like to know what you want to hear the Palestinian leaders say." And he told me what the Palestinians want to hear Prime Minister Netanyahu say, because they thought that I'd have some hand in the writing of the Prime Minister's speech. So he told me what the Palestinians wanted to hear. And a lot of it had to do with the recognition of their suffering during this conflict. And if you go look at the speech, we tried to find a truthful way to incorporate that yes, people on both sides have actually suffered during this conflict. Then he said, "What would you like to hear him say?" And I said, "Look, this is 2013. I said, I don't expect President Abbas to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, the nation state of the Jewish people, in his speech to the UN. He hadn't done it at that point 4 years after the Bar Ilan speech. I didn't expect him to do it. I said he'll have to do it to get a peace agreement, but I don't expect him to do it in his speech. So I asked for two things. The first thing is I want them to say that the Jews, and recognize that the Jews are a people, not just a faith. And the reason why that's important is faiths have no right to self-determination. Peoples do. The second thing is, I said, recognize some history between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. Forget about the 20th century. Forget about it. Let's talk about the fact that Jews pray facing Jerusalem for thousands of years. The fact, kings of Israel or the prophets of Israel, some reference to the fact that Israel is not like Uganda. What?
You couldn't get either one.
What was interesting to me when I said it, the person who really knows a lot about the Middle East, more than I'll probably learn in the rest of my life, he said to me, "I think that's doable." It seemed perfectly reasonable. And I said to this person, I said, look, I don't want to trip you up, but I don't think it's doable at all. I hope that you're right. Good luck. I don't see it. He goes, no, I think it's doable. Of course, he called me back a few days later. He says they're not willing to do it. And I said, of course they're not willing to do it, because that's what the conflict is about. So we can get involved. Okay. We can talk about sideshows all we want. I would like to see a Palestinian leader
talk about other things.
Would emerge and say, you know what, Jews live in this land. We live in this land. Let's figure out a way to reach a compromise.
I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm not saying that you're crazy or you're wrong. I'm just saying there's another side to this issue, which is that I think, apart from saying the Palestinians have not come to the table, I also believe that there's an internal Israeli issue about ruling over people without rights. But I'm going to move on because you don't want to talk about it. So let's talk about.
No, it's not that I don't want to talk about it. I don't accept the premise that we're ruling over people without rights. I just don't accept that premise.
You don't think that's true?
I don't think that's true.
You think the Palestinians have the same rights as Jews in the West Bank?
I think as a matter of international law, Ethan, as a matter of international law, Israel is legally in these territories. A lot of the things that are said about Israel's presence is simply false.
I'm not even questioning
it was legal in Resolution 242. I think the issue of the settlements, which you saw, there's now a change in U.S. position over the last year, that Israel's settlements and building in those territories
we're going to waste time here, Ron. Illegal. I'm not questioning the legality. I'm saying that there are two legal systems in the West Bank, one for Jews and one for non-Jews, and this is a problem. But if you don't want to acknowledge
it's one for Israelis and one for Palestinians. No, you're making allegations that are not true. It has nothing to do with Jews and non-Jews. This is the problem where you have you get a Palestinian leader who comes to the United Nations and accuses Israel of genocide. Genocide. Israel is accused of genocide routinely.
Why are you comparing it to genocide?
And now it's accused of apartheid. What's apartheid?
I didn't say apartheid either.
Jews and non-Jews. So what do you mean? What do you mean by having a legal system for Jews and for non-Jews? If you want to say Israelis, whether you're an Arab or a Jew, an Israeli and Palestinian, it's different.
Let's call them Israelis and non-Israelis.
Because we are Israeli citizens and we treat our citizens differently. They're going to treat non-citizens. Every state in the world does it. The question is your presence in those territories, your presence in that territory, is it legal? To set those territories, is it legal or is it not? But again, we can have this argument all you want. It is not going to actually advance. I don't want to have it anymore. Let's talk about something else. The cause of peace is having partners in the region, these other Arab states who actually want to advance and work in partnership with Israel, and to have them also, if it's possible, to encourage those Palestinian moderates who would like to make peace with Israel to give them the backing in order to make peace. Will that happen? I don't know. Is it more likely to happen after 2020? I would say yes.
You think, yeah.
And I think this breakthrough with the Arab states happened not despite the decision over Jerusalem or despite the decision of the Golan Heights. I think it happened almost because of the decision, because the United States showed you don't have a veto. We want to move forward. We're moving forward with Israel. We're moving forward with our Arab allies. And the danger will be
I agree with you.
If you have people who change the policy, if instead of confronting Iran, embracing allies, and putting the Palestinian issue in its proper perspective, if people change that and say, we're going to appease Iran, we're going to have friction with our allies, we're going to put the Palestinian issue front and center, I guarantee you're not going to have any progress. Guarantee.
I understand. I want to ask you about a couple of other things. One, we now have a change of administration underway here. Okay, one of the things that the Trump administration did, of course, was to pull the United States out of the Iran deal. This administration, incoming administration, seems to suggest that it wants to try to go back in. Now, I know that you don't want them to, and whether you do or don't want them to, it's going to be quite difficult for them to do it. But is there anything that if someone were to come to you and say, okay, look, we're not Trump, we're Biden, we want to have some kind of an agreement with Iran, we want to talk to them about something, are there things you would say to them, apart from don't try, are there things you would say to them like, well, if you do try to talk to them about a deal again, make sure that there is, no sunset, all of those things that most troubled you, that you should at least focus on those things? Is that what you would say to them? Has anybody asked you?
Of course, that's what we would say to them. That's what we said when the deal was being made, and that's what we
Of
said
course, I
afterwards.
understand. Right.
When Prime Minister Netanyahu came to Congress, he put forward a proposal, and he said, "Look, you have to link the removal of the restrictions in the nuclear deal to a change in the behavior of the Iranian regime. If you just put it on automatic pilot and you put these sunset clauses after 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or 15 years." It's only going to make the problem worse. You're actually going to resolve the nuclear problem with Iran. Look, the danger, and this is important, I would say, to all journalists, because over the last few years, journalists have said a lot about the importance of truth and facts. But I'm old enough to remember 2015. And I remember that statements were made that were simply false, that this deal blocks Iran's path to a bomb. Because if that were true, Ethan, we've been known each other long enough that you know that this is my number one concern. None of the other concerns add up to this concern. And so if there would be a deal that would actually block Iran's path to the bomb, I would be the first to support it. Prime Minister Netanyahu would be the first to support it, but it has to dismantle the military nuclear capability. It doesn't. So if you have, what I think should happen is, I think it would be a grave mistake to go back to the JCPOA. I think in 2015, there were a lot of question marks about the deal. Now we know exactly what happened, even before Trump pulled out. And now to go back to that deal would be even worse than going into it in the first place. Because
what
here
are the
you have
chances of their trying, do you think they really will try to go back?
Well, I can only judge based on what they're saying, because at this point, they haven't started the meetings. They are very sensitive, and this has been their position for the last 6 months. The incoming administration are sensitive to have any talks with any foreign officials before. So what I suspect will happen, and we will do this in good faith, to try to reach a common position with the new administration. I hope that they will hear us out. I hope they will hear their other allies in the region out, and that they will listen to what our concerns were. Because when I remember when the deal was sounded, saying this is the position of the allies of the United States. And by that, they were talking about Britain, France, and Germany. But the allies of the United States who were in the region had a very different view. But what do we know? We just live there. And I think there's a moral calculation here that's very important, Ethan. And that is the moral calculation. You saw it when they had the six-party talks with North Korea, with both the Clinton and the Bush administrations, where at that point, two of the countries who were in those six-party talks, one of them was Japan
and Korea,
and one of them was South Korea. And Japan and South Korea were backing the deals that were made. And I think that has to count for something. The ones who have the most skin in the game.
Do you think that the
2015, just to finish the point, 2015, neither Israel nor the Arab states were there. And so I think it's critical for them to speak to us in the region. And we think we have a pretty good read of the region ourselves. They'll have to discuss it with us. I hope that, I hope they will discuss it with us. And I hope that we can forge a common policy. I can tell you from the point of view of Israel, we will certainly try to forge a common policy with an incoming administration. We hope they will see the region for what it is today and work with their allies. It's very interesting. We, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others, we have the same position when it comes to Iran. That's got to mean something.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that the Abraham Accords will give the UAE and Bahrain greater influence in this country as when this question comes up? In other words, they'll say, we've actually taken a risk for something we believe in, that you believe in too, which is our alliance with Israel. And so listen to us when we say, don't go back to the JCPOA. And a subsidiary of that question to you, Ron, is, do you think that the Saudis will say to the Biden administration once it's in office, listen to us on this, and I think we can probably do something with Israel?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think the critical question will be what will be said publicly, not just what is said privately, because I will tell you that Israel and our Arab neighbors had the same view as the Iran deal privately, and the Obama administration knew that. But the only ones who said publicly what they were saying privately was Israel. I think it's a question of whether or not and there are good signs from my point of view of what we've seen over the last few weeks. After
Hmm.
the U.S. elections, you saw leading officials in the Arab countries stake out public positions of what they think should happen. And I think that bodes well. And I
Yeah.
hope that President-elect Biden and his national security team will reach out come January 20th, because they're not talking to people before in
I
those first
understand.
few weeks, and to
Hmm.
say, okay, here's what we want to do. Is there a common ground to be found with Israel and the Arab states? Can we have a
Right.
policy that can also be backed by them? Now, I don't know if it's possible, but I think we should exhaust that possibility and to see if we can reach that common ground. Because, look, we want to ensure that Iran never develops a military nuclear capability. That is the
Of
single most
course.
important thing for Israel. And a deal that would achieve that outcome, which was said in 2015, even though it wasn't true, but a deal that actually would achieve that outcome is one that Israel would support, even
Of
though it
course.
may open other problems for Israel. But at least
Hmm.
the one existential problem will be resolved. And this is what people
Hmm.
never understood regarding the deal, and it's important for them to understand it today. If Israel was faced with a deal where the nuclear issue was fully resolved, then that is a deal that we could support, even though it wouldn't be a
Hmm.
perfect deal from our point of view. It would
Right.
still have other problems. Iran would still be
They're
a danger in the region,
ballistic
but at
missiles
least
and
it
sure.
would solve the one existential threat. The
I
problem with the
understand that.
nuclear deal was it didn't close that problem. It didn't
Hmm.
even delay it, contrary to what people
Hmm.
said, because
I
Iran was
understand.
doing research on development on advanced centrifuges. And it created much bigger problems by reducing the sanctions and giving a tailwind for all of Iran's aggression throughout the region and its terror campaign.
Ron, we're going to run out of time soon, so I want to ask you about two other issues, okay? One is the American Jewish community. In the years that you've been here, I wonder whether you feel, I mean, traditionally, the American Jewish community has been run by secular liberals. Under the Trump administration, they were somewhat replaced by more religiously orthodox, the Jared Kushners of the world. And I think of the Obama Jews and the Trump Jews, and now the Obama Jews are going to come back into office and the Trump Jews will leave office. But on the other hand, it seems to me that broadly, the Jewish community in this country, as it moves forward, is beginning to resemble more the Jewish community in Israel. That is to say, the secular Jews' children are intermarrying, and those who are more religiously affiliated will take on greater positions of leadership. And instead of it being 80-20 Democratic or 70-30, we'll head toward more like 50-50. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. In a generation from now, will that be true? You talk about the
Yeah, a generation
politics
or
and
two.
voting
Yeah.
voting patterns among American Jews. I don't know. The last Republican to carry the Jewish vote. Do you know who it was?
No.
Take a guess.
But I mean, at what level?
To carry the Jewish vote in presidential politics.
Well,
The
the
last
last
Republican
Republican.
presidential candidate.
I mean, this is like in the 50s or something. I have no idea.
It's many people think it's Reagan because he got by exit
No, it
polls
wasn't Reagan.
39%
No,
of
no,
the
no.
Jewish vote, but Carter actually got more votes. He got
Right,
45% at that time.
right.
The last Republican was Warren Harding, so it was a full century ago. So I don't know
Yeah,
what will happen in 10 years or
right.
20
I
years or 30
understand.
years. I
Okay.
think, look, I think there's a difference, obviously, between the Jewish population in the United States and the Jewish population in Israel, is because a lot of these issues that are front and center for the Israeli population are not front and center all the time. Like the security dilemma that you deal with every single day is very different. I think also assimilation is a different problem in Israel than outside of Israel, because assimilation inevitably leads to intermarriage outside of Israel, whereas assimilation in Israel, meaning less connected to Jewish particularism, let's say, doesn't necessarily lead to assimilation, because
Right.
the chances of an Israeli Jew marrying another Israeli Jew
Non-Israeli.
are very, very high. You have very few
Right.
intermarriage, very little intermarriage between Jews and Arabs within the state of Israel, and you
I
do have
understand
a
that.
non-Jewish population, Russian immigrants, and people come from other immigrations as well that had a higher percentage of people who were not technically defined or halachically Jewish. But it's a different type of problem. I don't know what will happen to the American Jewish community, but I do think that we have seen shifts and it's shifts that take a long time to happen. One of them is that Israel has become the center of Jewish civilization in a way that it wasn't 30 years ago, 50 years ago, or 100 years
That's
ago,
right.
because, when Israel was established in 48, only 5% of the world's Jews lived in Israel. And now Israel is the largest Jewish community in the world. I also think there's a
Correct.
generational shift from people who remembered a world without the state of Israel. If they're not 85 years old, they wouldn't remember such a world. And if they're not 65, you don't remember a vulnerable Israel. So Israel's rise
Right.
as a power, I think,
Of
has
course.
also affected
But I mean, what I'm
people's view.
saying is that the secular liberal Jews in America, what I'm saying is the intermarriage will lead them to be not identify themselves as leaders of a Jewish community in the same way. And the Orthodox, modern Orthodox in this country will likely move into that position. But anyway, it's just a thought. I wanted to
It,
see your
it, it,
reaction.
it could be the case. I do think that there is a real challenge of maintaining Jewish identity, which, if I'm thinking about what affects the relationship between Israel and the diaspora, because a lot of times people focus on this or that issue within Israel, whether it's, policy that a particular Israeli government has, or an issue like the Kotel, or an issue like conversion, other issues that are sometimes very,
Sure.
that people focus on. I think the larger issue is an attenuated Jewish identity. It doesn't matter which stream of Judaism somebody
Oh, I
affiliates
agree
with,
with you.
but if
Yeah.
there's not a strong Jewish identity, there's no reason to believe that there's going to be a strong connection to a Jewish state. So the single most important thing, I think, if we're going to try to ensure that the bonds between Israel and the next generation of American Jews remain strong, is frankly to strengthen Jewish identity. And I'll tell you, I went, when I first got here in the first few months, I spoke somewhere, and somebody asked me, what is your advice to American Jews? I said, well, strengthen Jewish identity, because that'll ensure that the next generation will be connected to Israel. And somebody told me Yitzhak Rabin had been there 40 years before, and he said the same thing. So apparently I was in
Yes.
good company. And this is something that Ben Gurion understood,
Right.
Rabin understood. The leaders of Israel understand that if you are more connected to Jewish life, if you're more connected to Jewish identity, you are going to be more connected to the Jewish state. And even if, opposition is a connection, it's not
Of
apathy.
course. Of course. Caring
And I
about it.
think
Of course.
people have not recognized a lot of these shifts is kind of an Israeli community coming of age and
Yes.
taking its place as a center of Jewish civilization in a way that it was not a few decades ago. And it also gives a certain responsibility for Israel vis-a-vis American Jews and Jews in the diaspora that maybe did
Right.
not exist 30, 40, 50
Right.
years ago,
In other words,
because,
help build
exactly.
Jewish identity in this country. I
Exactly, in
understand.
a way that,
Yeah.
after Jews in the United States in particular, but all over the world, has helped to really invest in Israel.
Of course,
Now that
because
this investment,
it's no longer a poor beggar state that needs the help of the American Jews. It's
right,
a very powerful, quite well-off state, which could actually help American Jewish community think about its future. So let me
exactly.
ask you one other thing, which is you're going to leave soon. You've spent more than 7 very exciting years here. I can't remember whether it was an interview. I think it was an interview. You said that your proudest moment was when the prime minister spoke in Congress. And I think you said that even after the Abraham Accords, but I just want to check here that that's still the moment you're proudest of. I know you're rather a defiant character, so I could see why that might produce the level of pride in you. But in all seriousness, aren't the Abraham Accords a greater moment of pride for you?
No, I'm very proud of the Abraham Accords, but I'll explain to you exactly, why I said what I said. One thing I've tried to do as ambassador, especially when I speak in different communities, and at this point I've made it to 47 states in the United States. I'm
Wow.
still three. I'm still three short. So those of you watching from Nebraska, North Dakota, and Hawaii, those are the three that I have not been to yet. But I try, at least when I can, engage with the Jewish community in these states, and very diverse communities, to let them appreciate what it means to have a sovereign Jewish state. What is the meaning of sovereignty? Why is Israel different than a Jewish community? What are the blessings of sovereignty? And the blessing of sovereignty is a voice, a refuge, and a shield. I think people understand the refuge, people fleeing persecution, from around the world, they should always have a place that they can come to in Israel, because other countries change their immigration policies all the time, including the United States. And people understand what it means to have a shield, which is probably the greatest transformation that occurred in the history of the Jewish people, that we went from powerlessness to power and have the ability to defend ourselves. But the thing that the speech did to me was it was the third element of Jewish sovereignty, which is having a voice, meaning the ability to speak out on matters that are vital for your future. Because 75 years ago, 80 years ago, when Jews were facing the prospect of imminent destruction, they had to beg Polish, diplomats to go and to say something to Roosevelt. And Jan Karski is the most famous one, but there were others as well that had to go and deliver a message to the Jews, pleading with the world's leaders to say something. And we did not have a collective voice. And so to me, part of what it means to be a sovereign state is to speak out on issues that are so vital. And in making that speech, the Prime Minister of Israel, in my view, fulfilled his fundamental moral obligation to speak out. Whether people agree, whether people disagree is another question. But you have the ability to speak out. Because I remember there was when the speech thing came out, this was in January 2015, the speech was announced, but it wasn't given until March 2015. And I remember 10 days or so after the speech was announced, I met with Jewish community leaders here in Washington. And I would say many of them had big issues with the Prime Minister coming and speaking in Congress, most of them actually. And they asked me why I was so supportive of it. And I told them what happened in Evian in 1938. And Evian, France was a meeting that the Roosevelt administration was sort of pressured into hosting to deal with the Jewish refugee problem. A Jewish refugee problem that was emerging then in Europe. And you had all these delegates that came from around the world to the Evian conference. And Hitler famously, in that conference, sent a letter to the delegates there. And you can find that letter online. And he says, you can have the Jews, I'll even put them on luxury ships for you. And the only countries that really did anything, you had the Kinder transport that went to Britain. While Britain was closing the gates of then Palestine, they took 10,000 kids in the Kinder transport. The Dominican Republic was another country that said that they would take in up to 100,000 Jews, but everybody else basically did nothing. What's interesting about that conference is there was a delegate from then mandatory Palestine. There was a delegate. They were allowed to participate, but they were not allowed to attend. They were not allowed to speak. And that delegate's name is the woman behind me, Golda Meir. So a future Prime Minister of Israel was not allowed to speak on the eve of the destruction of European Jewry. And why I felt so strongly about it then and why I feel it now is we have a regime in Tehran that openly calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. They actively work to achieve that goal. They want to develop nuclear weapons in order to destroy the state of Israel. They tweet about the destruction of Israel. And what I told those people 5 years ago, I'll tell you now, I told them that faced with such a regime that calls openly for the destruction of the one and only Jewish state, the current Prime Minister of Israel will speak. That is part of his moral obligation to be the leader of the one and only Jewish state. And I felt very strongly about it then. I feel strongly about it now. The difference between that and the Abraham Accords, or the historic things that have happened with the recognition of Jerusalem or the recognition of the Golan Heights as part of Israel's sovereignty, things with the Obama administration like the MOU that we were able to achieve despite the disagreements that we had on policy, long-term military assistance. The difference with that and the speech is the speech only depended on us. The Abraham Accords depends on a partner willing to take that step.
I understand.
And the decision of Trump to recognize Jerusalem or to move the embassy or to recognize, that depends on the United States. I can do whatever I can as ambassador to convince them to do it, but what depended on us and what is the purest, in my sense, in my view, meaning of sovereignty is to use a voice when we have it. Because the Jewish people didn't.
You had to persuade Speaker Boehner had to invite him. He had to be invited to Congress. But anyway, I understand your point. And what you're saying is also that it is symbolically the most powerful moment for you here for the reasons you laid out, which I understand. We have to wrap it up. And let me ask you
I'll tell you something else. that I don't think people realize. The Abraham Accords don't happen, in my view, without that speech. They would not have happened 5 years later. And when we made that speech, when the prime minister made that speech, people in the region, and I won't say who and I won't say when, reached out to him pretty quickly and said, thank you for speaking for us as well. And that speech convinced our Arab neighbors that we were prepared to stand even if we have to stand alone. In fact, the prime minister said that in his speech. He said Israel will stand even if it has to stand alone. He didn't think we'd have to stand alone, but he said, so for them, and I didn't realize, I must admit, that was an unintended positive consequence of that speech. Mm-hmm. When I was thinking about the speech, I didn't appreciate the impact it would have on the Arab world. But for the Arab world, that speech for them was a bit of, it was like Israel's declaration of independence from America. Because if we're a vassal of Rome, then why deal with the vassal? Just deal with Rome. But when Israel, when the prime minister of Israel was willing to take that stand, they said, wait a second, this is a country that's an independent country. And if it's willing to stand up and speak, even if alone, maybe it's willing to stand by our side, even if it's against the policy of the United States.
It's actually especially interesting. Yes, it's especially interesting to me because I know that you wanted Arab representatives in Congress to listen to the prime minister, and they declined to join. So it's interesting that they
weren't physically there, but boy, did they listen.
Well, and that's super interesting. And you yourself weren't aware. It was saying to them, we actually are just going to damn do it. And that made a big difference. And that's very interesting. So my last question for you, Ron, is you're going home. I assume you don't have a job waiting for you. Are you planning to write a book? Are you planning? Do you have any thoughts about what you're going to do next, apart from, say, sleep for 3 days?
I don't know. We'll have to see. I really have not thought a great deal about it because we have been so busy in the last few weeks.
That's fine.
And the last few weeks from, we got 3 peace agreements between August and October, and all of the work surrounding it. And then even since the election, there have been a number of different things that we are trying to finalize before the new administration comes in, and also to try to forge, which is something I'm also focused on right now, is can we forge a common position with the Arab states and Israel around especially Iran-related issues, and a common position with the new administration, which I think is very important to at least try to forge that common position as quickly as possible, and to work with the new administration to, I think, convince them that their allies in the region really have that position and are willing to work with the U.S. in advance peace and security. And I think there's hope there. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's possible to do it. And I look forward to the next few weeks to see if we can achieve that goal.
That's great. So in my dozen or so years of knowing you, there are a few people I've enjoyed arguing with as much as you, Ron. So I thank you for this conversation and for your graciousness and for your participation in this conference.
Well, I will give you a compliment as well. I don't know if if my favorite person to argue with, but you are a true journalist, which I think is a dying art. And somebody who lets the facts speak for themselves and tries to be very careful about it. And all over the years that I've known you, whenever you wrote a piece or wrote anything, I knew that it was always accurate, and that it was what's the line, the closest version to the truth that you knew that you were putting forward. And as given that you've become sort of an endangered species, journalists and not necessarily activists. And even though I know you have clear opinions on a lot of issues and we've had a chance to discuss them, but I think in your work, you've always been a journalist. And I have more and more appreciation for that as years go by, because there's so few of you out there. You should try to get a minion together, see if you can come up with the 10 to do it.
Thanks
but
a lot.
It's a pleasure talking to you again. We should do it more frequently than once every 2 years.
A pleasure.